But it didn't, so there's that. Hello, there
That would
is
have been
sound.
amusing though, Will.
Okay, great. Good. Great, excellent. Why am I getting sound on that? That's my next question. Is I'm getting sound on a thing I shouldn't be getting sound on?
Well, fix your thing.
I'm gonna fix my thing, and then we'll get started. Where? Not that. It's not
This
that.
is how my streams start every week too.
Chaotic. It's good.
Well, yeah, I thought I had turned it off, but apparently I don't know. Huh? It's not in this scene, so I don't know how that made sound. That's terrifying. Oh, it's in the other scene. It's in the other scene, and I was no, that's not right. Interesting.
Hey, Will, can I tell you a minor achievement?
Sure.
While you're fixing, I managed to resubscribe myself to Twitch without one of our subscribers doing it for me.
Well done. I'm impressed. Yeah, the other staffers who aren't here regularly have their personal accounts, and many members of chat consider it a great point of pride to give them an account, to give them a subscription to the channel. And it's always
despite the fact that
yeah, right, they work here, right? Yeah.
Despite the fact that I have an Amazon account, Prime account, specifically that I use just for this.
Right. Yeah. Any primers in chat? Yes, new guy. The coffee shop did have these extra monitors on standby. When we built the coffee shop set, we specifically
we had a plan.
We brought these in to do exactly this.
There we go. Hold on. Let's see. Well, virtual poster. There we go. Always have a plan. Right there.
Yeah, it's right over there. All right. So now that I am slightly out of the brain fog that I was in getting us into this event, hello, everyone. Welcome to our very special episode of Design Club. We're going to introduce everyone in a moment. If you're new here at Design Club, this is the part of our week where we sit down and talk about game design in the games industry from like a more narrow view. We do a broader review at breakfast where we talk about a little bit of everything. Next week, it's going to be 100% us talking about all of the things that got announced this weekend, starting tonight. And that'll be just a blast, I'm sure. But here we're going to focus in. So today we have some friends from IATSE who are...
Wait, from where?
Huh?
We got to say it again.
From IATSE?
IATSE. There we go.
Yeah, okay, cool.
You got to be clear on, I mean, anything that's an acronym, you really got to hit all the,
yeah, but
pronunciation points.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a tangent now, and you brought this on yourself, Geoff, which is I don't think that it's an acronym anymore. Like, it functions as an acronym, but now it's also the name, right? Like, SAG is now no longer, like, just an acronym for the Screen Actors Guild. It is also the name of the thing, right? Laser, also an acronym. On the
tangent. Did you know that actually, as a member of SAG, you get big discounts on cosmetic surgery? Because they don't want an anti-SAG...
Oh, stop it. Geoff is full of puns. Yes, Ben will be making that face all stream long in some way or another.
Usually I just get to inflict, wow, I've already been thrown in the pungent in chat.
Yeah,
excellent.
Right. Yeah, it's great. Yes, there will be...
I interrupted our introductions. We should get to the introductions so that all of our guests feel comfortable talking.
Yes, so let's start with... let's go across the top. Ben, let's start with you.
All right. Hi, I'm Ben. Pronouns are he and him. I work as a visual effects and concept artist for video games. I've been in the industry for about 4 years, mainly working in about indie and AA spaces. And my favorite game is The Beginner's Guide, which is actually I found through extra credits a few years back.
Awesome. Chrissy, you're up.
Hi, y'all. My name's Chrissy. I work with the IATSE, aka the IATSE, aka just the IA, if you prefer. I'm an organizer and international representative. Previously, I used to work in series 2D animation for television, and I worked at this place called Titmouse in New York City, where we formed a union in 2022. We just ratified our first contract last year. Really proud of that. But now I get to work full time with the IA to help folks in video games foreign unions as well. My favorite game right now is Dave the Diver. I've been playing that nonstop.
Oh, okay. I have not played Dave the Diver, largely because I value having free time. Because I looked at it and went, oh no. Oh no, this is everything. Also, a small point of pride. I remember when we covered the titmouse unionization thing in 2022. Very happy about
Wow.
that.
Mhm.
All right,
That's awesome.
and Carlos, you're up.
Hi, so my name is Carlos. Most of my background is in production and consulting. Honestly, I do a lot of activism work specifically for game development and game developers in general. And honestly, the game that I'm so obsessed right now that I have over 400 hours is Helldivers. I'm sorry. I love that game.
Nice.
I got 400 hours. I just don't get tired.
Yeah, I have definitely been there. Matt and I have done Helldivers together on stream before, and we've pulled back a little bit because it's very easy for us to stop talking and just Helldive for 2 hours,
yes,
right? Which
yes.
is a problem when you're streaming it because you have to be like
Focus.
engaging with the community, and it's very unengaging for Matt and I to just be like, there's a bug on your left, right? I got it. Can you call in the thing? Yeah, I got it.
Peanut.
For like
right there.
for like
Close
2
it all.
hours. It's not the best content because it's such a good game. Oh, it's such a good
It
game.
is.
Well, can I tell you, even though I'm not playing it right now, watching you guys enough, I actually 2 nights ago watched the original Starship Troopers movie again. Like it somehow came across my feed, and I was just like, "Screw it, this is my evening."
I feel like that whole journey of Starship Troopers the book to Starship Troopers the movie to Helldivers is such a fantastically interesting game of philosophical telephone.
Yes.
And
I'm gonna have to check out Helldivers.
oh yeah, it's very good. It does a really great job of adopting Verhoeven's like over the top, very clearly propagandized view of democracy, right? It's all for democracy, except it doesn't sound a lot like democracy. And so it's a very interesting world, and the gameplay is really fun as well, which is really cool.
And if you haven't read the book, which is what everything was the OG from, the book is also one of Heinlein's probably best sci-fi books, and B, still recommended reading actually in the officers' corps of, I believe, most of the U.S. military branches.
Yeah,
Because it talks about the philosophical use of war.
yeah. And
Big fan of the movie. Had no idea about the book.
I love it. I'm a fan of the book, and I'm like, yes, keep speaking.
Right.
I love it.
And then, of course, once you've done all of that, you can find the extremely difficult to find Japanese anime that's based on it because it's about dudes in mecha suits. So, of course, there's an anime about it. It's just American mecha. In
So
all of the same
cool.
way, by the way, that regular mech and Gundam stories are about war and child soldiers. Starship Troopers is also about war and child soldiers, just in a different way. It's great.
With bugs.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, weird. That and Ender's Game, which are the 2 ones that immediately come to mind for stories about child warriors, both have bugs in them as protagonists.
That
or antagonists.
Yeah, there's okay. I'm gonna pull us back. I'm gonna pull us back because we could do this forever, and I'm
Yeah,
gonna
bring
say
us in,
no.
Will.
I'm gonna say no. Okay. We might have new people here, so Geoff, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce myself, and I'll ask the first question and get us started. Chat, you have no idea how much willpower that took. Yeah, introduce yourself.
I was going to back you up.
Since I know we have a couple of new people in chat, hey everybody, I am Jeffrey Zetkin. I'm the studio director of Extra Credits. I'm also a longtime game designer since '97 professionally, and I would have been what would be considered an indie before that. I also, besides working on numerous games, mostly MMOs, ran EDAR, which was the video game industry's biggest data research studio. Founded it with a partner in '06 and sold it in '16. And I am currently with this group of mad lads as we bring history to the internet, as well as games and occasionally mythology, literature, politics, and live talk shows. And I am joined as my partner in crime for the daily or weekly streams. Oh, I pointed the right way.
You did. Good job. Hi,
Will
I'm
over
Will,
here.
everyone. I am the streamer in residence, stream overlord, official Twitch e-boy of Extra Credits. I run all of our live streaming stuff. It all runs through my rig. I host all 3 of our weekly podcasts. This one, our Extra Politics podcast on Wednesday nights, where we look at politics through a gaming lens and we talk about systems and how we can change those systems to get more of the world that we want. And I also co-host Breakfast on Monday with Matt, where we talk about all of the news of the week, usually the previous week. Sometimes we get lucky and people break news before our show rather than after it, but that's a rarity. And yeah, you can find me playing video games here. I've been doing this for
A while.
5 years. 5 years. And I have played hundreds of games and describe myself as indie trash. It's great. Love it.
Nice.
So we have gathered you all here today to have an interesting and rousing discussion about unionization in the games industry. So I thought we could start off with some real simple questions. Can you tell us more about this organization that you all work with or through IATSE or the IA or however you want to describe it to our audience, and what the purpose of that organization?
Yeah, so just real quick, I wanted to say to anybody in the chat, if you've got questions about anything we're talking about, please don't hesitate to write them in. I'm paying attention too. I'm sure Will is, but so the IA, the IATSE, stands for International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. And basically what the IA is the entertainment union. We cover people who work stage, Broadway, film, television, prop shops, the manufacturing of things for film and television. But we have so much crossover into things that work for games, right? So like animation, for example, is a huge thing in video games. Design, concept artists, camera people, many folks who are previous or current IATSE local members already work in games, especially coming out of Local 839, which is the Animation Guild. That's my personal local. But ultimately, what we're hoping to achieve for workers in games is what's called a national game worker local, which basically means that no matter where you work or where you live in the country, you are a member of what would be considered a game workers guild. It's not like originally a local was tied to a geographical area because back when the IA was formed in over 125 years ago, it was important to be where your job was. So the contract would apply to a geographic location and not necessarily a nationwide thing. But because we're forming something brand new, this is completely uncharted territory. We have the opportunity to make it as open and inclusive as possible for game workers of all types and job titles to be a part of it so that we can cover the most people under a contract as possible. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
That does a great job of answering both parts of that question.
Great.
And actually, I just learned a thing because I thought this was more game focused. I hadn't realized it was part of a broader family, which is great.
Yeah. And I think that that's a very interesting. We talk a lot about how games are weird, right? As a form of media, games are A, super young, and B, super weird, and that they're participatory in a way that a lot of other forms of media aren't. But they also require this incredible amount of technical acumen, and they have credits lists that can be as long as some like Marvel movies, and it requires all of these different skill sets. So it makes a lot of sense that games would sort of be a natural outgrowth of an existing technical union rather than starting from scratch. And I guess, do you feel like it's a advantage to be starting from an existing framework, or do you feel like sometimes it gets difficult to bend the framework of your existing union structure into the new shapes that a national local needs for all of these different companies and jobs and titles and roles and all of that?
I don't want to talk too much, but
Well, you're kind of here for that. Sorry.
right, but I want Carlos and Ben to take most of this, but I'll try to answer some more technical, like union focused stuff. So in terms of how this local shapes up, it's up to the people who form it. And those people are the people who work in games who are willing to form unions at their studios. It's not something that I would determine. as an international representative. And while we can look to other locals within the IATSE as like inspiration for the structure or the way that things operate, it ultimately will be a brand new constitution and bylaws that are written by the workers themselves. So how the local itself operates is TBD. You know,
Can I actually, for a clarifying question, you keep saying local. How? Tell me more. Like, does local at this case again, just with how we live nowadays? Locals, from what I at least think I understand, and I'm going to say it, and if I'm wrong, please correct me because I want to make sure I'm fully understanding the conversation. Like, I live in San Diego, so for example, and my wife is a member of San Diego. She's a member of SAG as an actor, but also meets with the San Diego branch of SAG. Would that be considered a local, or like what does local exactly entail?
Great question, Geoff. So a local is really just kind of a collection. Okay. And as I said earlier, like locals were kind of like, due to the historic nature of the union as IA being over 125 years old, they used to be based specifically on a local area, like a geographic location. For example, like the Animation Guild used to be a local of Los Angeles County. But within the last year, the animation has expanded. The Animation Guild has expanded into a national local. So now it applies to folks in New York, it applies to folks in Texas, it applies to folks in West Virginia. It's not just geographically located in Los Angeles. However, there are other locals that are specific to an area. So like Local 16, for example. Local 16 are the backstage technical staff that work like GDC. They work at like large trade show venues and concerts and things like that. But they're local only to the San Francisco area, whereas there would be another local in like other parts of California that apply to workers in those specific areas because of the historic nature of that local.
So local at this point means group that may or may not be tied to geographically tied. Correct.
It's really like grouping people by what they do for work, really.
So it's not necessarily a job title. It's more of like a departmental bucket, kind of, right? Animator, like anyone who works in animation is going to be part of one bucket, even though your job title might not strictly be animator, right? Or,
yes.
Okay, great, awesome. So
I also just want to clarify that if you are an Animation Guild local member and also a Game Worker Guild local member, you would be a member of both locals. It wouldn't be that our Game Worker local would take the animation workers out of that and put them into the Animation Guild.
So theoretically, you could be, man, that's got to be interesting for how some contracts work.
Yeah, well, there's a reason, Geoff, that we're friends with lawyers who do like all that contract work, because I look at it, my brain turns to soup. So
after 20 plus years of doing this, I can now read most legalese, but it's a developed skill.
All right. So I have a question that I want to throw, and this one is more. This one goes more towards Ben and Carlos, because Chrissy says she's talking too much, and I want to give them something. So, gents, why are we doing this? Why is unionization important? What to you specifically, right? We can talk the general case, but also to you specifically, why is this an important movement that you are involved in?
Ben, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll yeah, totally down. So for me, like when I started working initially in games, I kind of had a rough start, mainly working with the AA scene. I kind of got crunched pretty hard early on, doing about at some points to do my regular 8 hours per day, but then some days it felt like the requirements were meeting to the points of going 12 hours a day, 18 hours a day. Points were, and these were not overtime, these were not that, but they needed to get to this point done to meet these deadlines, to meet these expectations that were set. And it was kind of when I felt that, and after dealing with all that crunch, it made me realize like, oh, at a larger scale, this is, if I'm feeling this right now, and I hated it, I'm like, this is probably happening at other studios at a dramatically different scale, whether it's self-imposed or kind of through this kind of structure that may have indirectly may have lined up. The other part of it was kind of looking at the similarities as when I was working as a concept artist, talking to my friends in the animation guild, and seeing the similarities of what the jobs that I would have to be doing in addition to what they're doing. And the similarities were pretty similar, if not exactly the same. And it made me question a lot more, like there might be more similarities that we could actually have and bring over into games rather than having this kind of complete separation, because a lot of the things that we are doing were relatively or extremely similar.
Okay. Carlos, what about you?
Well, for me, it gets really personal because my whole history with the game industry has been extremely difficult, even breaking in and working in. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so there's pretty much no scene there. So it's extremely hard unless you move over here to the States. And for me, it boils down to, let me put an example. My brother died in November. I couldn't help with the funeral arrangement, with anything economic, because I was let go last year. And that's just me. I have friends in Arcane. I have friends in different studios that right now they're selling all their belongings. They can't pay their rent. They cannot pay their mortgages, and we're in a time and place that there's no job security in the game industry. And my belief is that this is much worse than 2007 when the economy was crashing, because I didn't see that many studios closing that fast. And now it doesn't matter how good you do your job. You can sell a game, millions of copies. You can be the best of the best and still be let go. And it's very hard. It enrages me seeing good people that have given their all for this art, because it's an art, and have to make the difficult decisions between, do I want to continue in the game industry or do I need to switch because I need to support a family?
Yeah. And I think that definitely squares with a lot of the news trends that we've been talking about at Breakfast, with increased layoffs and shrinkages and studio closings and the increasing.
Though that's nothing new. Like, having been in the industry for 25 years, like,
oh yeah,
layoffs have always been a part of the industry. Like, it's the awful part of the industry.
Yeah.
Is that, and in some cases it's almost weird to think of that there might be continuity, because if you look, say, over at films, when you go and you're like, hey, we're going to go make the next Avengers movie, it's not like the group making the next Avengers movie was all sitting around ready to go. They're bringing in writers and, pre-production staff, and then later actors and voice actors and motion, and the camera crew and the gaffers and the set designers and everybody. And then after that, it goes into post and all of the stuff there. The people were all brought in to do their tasks, sometimes sequentially, sometimes not. But afterwards, they're not expecting to sit around waiting for the next Avengers movie. They all move on to their next project. And it may be moving on as a studio. Like, you may have been hired as a post-effects studio for the Avengers movie, but Chris Hemsworth isn't sitting around going, when do I get my next role? With Avengers, his agent is off getting him other things. And of course, that group is unionized. But games, in a lot of cases, a studio will go make a game, and sometimes they'll go make a sequel. But oftentimes the studio heads leads are often working in furious pre-production, so that by the time the team rolls off one game, there's another game like signed, the money's. This is as a dev studio. Like, the dev studio has already figured out their next thing, has secured the funding to make it, so that people can keep making it and not equivalently have everybody gets let go now because we don't have more money. Like, game projects kind of go project to project to project just on how the industry works, unless you're on a evergreen or live game,
right,
where in some cases you put out the game and cool, that's the beginning, and you're now expecting to run the game for a decade. But even that takes a different group of people, because the developers who make a game may not be the right skill set of the people or the right ratio of the people required to maintain the game.
And I think all of that is true. I also think that there is a distinct difference now, which is that the public sentiment and information transparency to the public about the working conditions, about the amount of layoffs and the way that things are happening. I don't know. At least it feels that way to me as someone, and partially the information may have been available, but the vast majority of gamers weren't in the right place in their lives to ingest that information and to have an opinion about the working conditions of game designers and developers.
Will, you need to go read up on EA Spouse at some point for your history.
Okay, great. I will.
If I could just touch on what Geoff was talking about a little bit. I think what you're bringing up is really important because the comparison between film, television, animation work and that in games, while it's not identical by any means, there are a lot of contract workers within games, and there's also a lot of people who kind of have these evergreen jobs at studios. So I think that a lot of what we can kind of draw a comparison to, and I'm going to cite my own local for like 50,000 times in this session. So the Animation Guild did a great job of creating a sustainable job career for folks working those contract jobs. And also for the folks who work like long-term staff where they're like maybe at DreamWorks and rolling from production to production, and they also kind of have those evergreen jobs. But it's about creating the ability for folks to roll with the punches and not get knocked on their ass. Creating resources for or creating sustainability within the games industry, I think, is especially important now with all of the layoffs that are constantly happening, because we see so many studios where like maybe some workers are getting these exceptional severance packages, and then we're also seeing some workers who get nothing. And it's about creating a standard so that every worker knows exactly what will happen should they have to be laid off at a studio, so that they know that they're taken care of. Their health insurance will be extended by X number of months. Their severance pay will be X number of weeks or months, or however we end up negotiating it. Those things are the things that can help workers find that ability to continue working in an industry where there are these like ups and downs and ebbs and flows.
Right. So it's more about changing the overall culture to bring it more in line with the film culture, that because that is the expectation, and contracts are written with the expectation that teams will dissolve and reform and flow pretty naturally towards the projects that they're needed in. That's built into their contracts. And while that might be a way that you can look at the games industry, that's not the way that it's coming. Contracts aren't built with that in mind, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah. Do you think, and this is just me not knowing about it, that if the unionization route becomes more common, do you think that'll end up killing indie and mid-tier studios? And the reason I ask this is groups able to guarantee like severance and other things implies a certain amount of deep pockets in them. And a lot of indie and mid-sized studios, the reason they lay off people is because their game doesn't do well. And basically, for anybody not familiar with game production, you work for anywhere between, say, 6 months up to 6 years on a project before it goes live. And what this means is you're paying the cost, somebody is paying the cost of everybody's salaries and office space and healthcare and computers and everything else, or somewhere between these 6 months and 6 years. And they're building up this huge amount of debt that basically the game, that when it comes out and sells, well, and of course, and then marketing and all the other expenses, when it sells, all of that money comes in, pays back basically the upfront cost of production. And if we're lucky, sells really well, and then everybody gets some sort of profit sharing and distribution in addition to that. and it gives them enough money to basically go start the next game and basically have those coffers full so they can do this all over again and again and again. And so whenever a game that you do a lot of production on doesn't hit or doesn't sell well, if the studio is small to mid-sized, they may not have the reserves to cover basically the shortfall in projections. And I don't know how that works with things like with guarantees.
So what we're not out to do, number one, is to bankrupt a company, because without a company, we don't have jobs, and therefore we don't have a union.
Again, so this is from a point of ignorance. So I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
For sure. So when we get to the negotiating table, we have to go with reasonable and realistic expectations. We can't go and say, hey, this is an indie studio of 20 people. Everybody wants $1 million salary. You know?
Oh, that'd be nice.
Right? I know. I'd sign up yesterday.
I'd take it.
But
Sorry,
it's about creating that, again, that like sustainable future and that collaboration between management and the workers that makes it so that everybody can have a future together, and not eliminate workers' voices in the things that matter the most to them, that affect them the most, which are the way that their working lives operate. So it's not about getting to the negotiating table and demanding all of the money they have. It's about recognizing, starting where we're at and making improvements.
Yeah, in other words, bargaining, because the whole point of this is that it's a symbiotic relationship. Like Chrissy just mentioned, we don't want to lose our jobs. We don't want the job to be closed. But at the same time, we deserve a fair pay. We deserve to be treated as humans. And, you know, we just, like any other worker, we just want to be treated as human beings. That's pretty much what it boils down. And even in the studio, those conversations need to happen.
And a lot of that depends on the studio and the studio culture. That is one of the things, like, and you know, from part of what you were saying, Chrissy, with the layoffs, and you know, some groups get great severance and some don't. That comes entirely down to studio culture. Right. And that is one of the things, is that there is not a standardization of studio cultures, just because every studio is its own monster and its own saint at the same time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say so much studio culture, because culture can be toxic and it can vary dramatically. I would just say more in the business side, in the economic side, there needs to be a standardization and how we manage layoff. Because right now, the biggest problem we're having in the industry is that we're doing layoff without any justification, because we're not using the excuse of we're going bankrupt. The best example I can say is Microsoft. Microsoft laid off, closed a bunch of studio, and they're right now the most valuable company in the United States. They're $1 trillion company. And, you know, they fire the person next to you, and then you're expected to carry that load. So that's the whole disconnect that we're having.
And I think part of that is the culture isn't just the culture in the individual department, right? The culture is the culture, the values that the company promotes at every level, from hiring to severance to all of those things, right? And we've definitely seen a lot of weird mergers, right? We've been looking at the I can't even remember the name of the megacorp that wants to be a Zaibatsu so
Embracer?
Badly.
Embracer,
yeah, that's right. The creepiest name for a group that's just hug us. Hug us to
capitalism
death.
in one name.
Right,
Embracer will have done more damage to the game industry than I think any other one group in the past decade with their buying spree. For those not familiar, Embracer basically is venture funded, got a lot of money, bought some studios, leveraged the value of those studios to borrow more money, and with that borrowed money, bought more studios, leveraged the value of those studios, and kind of kept on this weird acquisition debt thing under the theory that they could grow large enough to be sustainable, and then found out that they couldn't, and suddenly had all of this debt, owned all of these studios. And one of the biggest reasons for the video game layoffs that you've been hearing about is that I feel like they've been like half Embracer. Like that may not be right, but like the total value of jobs lost if you took Embracer out of the equation, it feels like would be half. And they also did it so publicly that it gave a lot of other studios an excuse to do some of the same.
And I
Is that a fairly accurate?
I agree, man. Like Embracer is the poster child. When people talk about layoff, we talk, if it's not Microsoft, because it's the most recent one that was in the news, Embracer is the one that comes up. And the one thing that I always tell people is the whole myth of infinite growth. They thought they would have infinite growth, infinite capital. And when they hit the ceiling and they realize, oh no, we can't keep doing this, it wasn't the executive that paid the cost. It was the workers that paid the costs for overreaching, for not being sustainable. And the writing was there on the wall from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It's not like they didn't know, you know.
Well, actually, it was. It wasn't because when they started it, interest rates were at 0. And so basically debt was free. And when suddenly interest rates are at 5% now, 5% on, equivalently billions of dollars is a lot more than 0%. And there's been a combination of economic factors that have led to the series of events we saw happening. Like, they didn't start out thinking, we're going to fail. They, started out thinking they were the smartest people in the room and didn't realize that they hadn't thought of some things.
Yeah.
But they also, as you said, Carlos, weren't the ones who ended up paying the price for this. And a lot of studios that had been built up for a very long time off the hard work of a lot of different people were the ones that had the rugs pulled out from under them.
So let's,
for me, sorry, go ahead.
So let's hold on Embracer for a second, because I think this like sort of, well, no, I mean, like, we're all there for you to the fire, but I want to use Embracer kind of as the starting off point. So like, is Embracer sort of emblematic of the challenges that that people are facing, right? Because we're talking about, like, okay, so there's a problem, right? How is the struggle of unionizing the video games industry unique? What makes this a different challenge than organizing, like, I don't know, steelworkers, right? Or Teamsters, right? Or
Starbucks, yeah.
Right, like pick an iconic union, right? Teamsters and steelworkers are probably the most iconic here in the States. They're the ones that are most, commonly associated with economic growth. Is sort of the fact that a company like Embracer believes they can get something like infinite growth and wants to move in that direction because, it doesn't matter what the cost is. In the end, we will have generated a lot of excess value for the shareholders. Sort of mentality holds true. Is that sort of emblematic of the unique challenges of the games industry, or are there others that I'm not thinking about, or is that what you expected going in? I want to know, like, what makes this different in terms of the challenges and the way that you're moving forward?
I think one of the biggest challenges for game workers is that they don't have that direct comparison and experience with unions to see the tangible benefits that workers who are union receive. And then want it for themselves. So like I said, there is that crossover of like animation workers and camera workers and other IATSE locals that like have that crossover into games, but it's not as though they're working on the same project and then this person is getting X, Y, and Z and they're not. So I think this is like a good comparison to like visual effects, which is also another like recently like booming sort of unionizing industry, is that they're on set every day. They don't get meal breaks. They don't get meal penalties. They don't get paid overtime. They're working the same hours. They're busting ass and honestly, like being abused on set. Whereas the folks who have a union contract can't get treated like that. So they have that like direct comparison to be like, this is what could be changed for us. Why don't we have that? And I think that game workers don't have that in their day-to-day lives to say, that's exactly what I want. And also there's nothing like, there are small unions out there right now. I know that like ZeniMax, I think, is currently working on their contract. But there hasn't, I know that Sega of America has a tentative agreement, I believe, and so does Tender Claws, but those are very small units. So there's not been that like huge example that's been set yet for like most game workers to look to be like, wow, that's what we could have. That would be sick, wouldn't it?
So you need a Newsies moment. in other words.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
And we're working on it every day.
It's also tricky, well, because there's a whole confluence of things working against this too, which is that for a long time, more people have wanted to work in games than the game industry could support. And so there was always a feeling too that, well, if you don't want to do it, there's 10 other people who want your job. And this has been exacerbated by the amount of game schools that have come in. Like when I started out, everybody was self-taught. Now that there are huge amounts of universities there are universities pumping more people out through game tracks than the industry can support, in addition to the people who aren't going through universities. And so there's this little fire hose of people being directed at the game industry, like that's this big, where the game industry could probably support this many people in making things right now. And so that has worked in some cases against how people are treated, because some people, especially entry-level to mid-level people, are just deemed easily replaceable. I won't say whether, like, it's just, that is a thing that has gone on, brought in by some external factors that the game industry itself can't control. Like, we don't control how many schools there are suddenly going, oh, lots of people want games, we can charge them money to teach them this, even if there aren't enough careers out there to get them placed.
And
I think if you took that exact same paragraph and substituted video games with animation, you would have something that's equally as true.
Yeah. Same actually with, there are, sorry, it is not specific to the game industry, but it has been a newer problem for us because the game universities are relatively recent.
Yeah.
And therefore it is something the industry has suddenly had to adjust to in a way that I don't think they were prepared for.
I remember watching TV ads for like DeVry,
DeVry, Full Sail,
and Full Sail,
all of them.
like on Cartoon Network, mind you.
G4.
Oh God,
Yep.
G4 was those very bizarre fever dream halcyon days of G4.
And there are some really good game schools, but there's also a lot that, let's just say, aren't necessarily doing their students the best things
my point was going to be that there used to be a countably many nameable number of schools that were putting like their name out on places where people who were interested in games would watch them, and now especially because of like school from home, it feels like the amount has popped up. I also think to some extent that the prevalence and fame of solo dev work, right? We've had so let's talk Stardew Valley, let's talk Undertale.
Oh, that's a duel.
Slay the Spire is a few. Fez, Balatro. Balatro sold 1 million copies. 1 million for it is under 100 megabytes, and it's all written in Lua, and it's made by one dude. Right. And so
this is all the survivorship bias. You get a couple of hits like this and you don't hear about the thousands that didn't.
Correct. And that survivorship bias drives people who might otherwise be put off by the amount of work, or who might want to gain a fuller understanding before they eat themselves in. But there is some impulse that is derived from, okay, one person made this game. This game's beautiful, and I love this game. I can totally do it too. I'm gonna full send on this career path without having a coherent understanding of the risks of anything else. It's so glamorous, right? It's like being a Twitch streamer, right?
We cut Chris off a little bit. You were just saying that it's similar to animation. Again, I'm not trying to make excuses for the game industry. I was just bringing up. There's a lot of factors in play right now that make it so much more complicated than it probably should be.
Yeah.
Just based on what's going on. Did you have more to say about that, or was that kind of?
No, I mean, like, the reason I bring it up is because it's ultimately talking about like a union versus a non-union workforce and how we face similar struggles. And I'm not saying that every single one of them is resolved within a union contract, but there are things that we can absolutely address at the negotiating table. So, if if a lot of workers in games are concerned about career longevity, like writing things into your contract around seniority is really important. So if you've been working at a company for 10, 15 years, they can't fire you over somebody who's been there for a year and a half and makes half the amount of money that you do just because they're cheaper. I'm not saying that this is something that would absolutely be in a contract. This is just something that could be, if that's what's important to the workers. Seniority is a huge thing to basically secure careers long term for workers, and it can be very polarizing, especially for folks who are new to the industry, because it does feel like exclusionary. So when we were negotiating our contract at Titmouse, we ultimately decided to omit it from our contract because we had a much younger workforce that was the majority of the people who worked there. So, we are ultimately writing a contract that is for the majority. It's not for the few, right? It's a democratic process. And therefore, if it's an issue that's important to you, but you're outvoted on it, that's unfortunate. That's part of negotiating and bargaining. But yeah, like I said, we ultimately decided to not include it because our representative workforce was not in favor of it. But if the representative workforce at a game studio is, then let's put it in,
Can I mention three things that during the conversation that just popped up into my head, and it goes to the biggest challenges that we have in unionizing, and this a little bit to Embracer. A lot of companies took advantage of the low interest rate that we had during COVID, and they abused the system. And that's another thing, abusing the system that they have. And this also applies to universities. Universities right now, a lot of them, let's call a spade, they are diploma mill. There's some goods, and there's some other ones that are just chucking people because they don't really represent a reality, or they don't project what game development truly is and the sacrifice and the effort that involves. Inside education, inside those universities, there's also the lack of understanding of unions, the history of unions, and what unions are, because the United States of America have made the word union a dirty word, a word that symbolizes socialism or communism. And all those three factors, when you have company abusing the government, when you have education becoming corporations, and then you go to the lack of education and understanding of those factors, is when we have a workforce that can be taken advantage of.
Well, I also think that something that you mentioned strikes kind of a chord with me, which is that as I've grown to understand more and more about the industry, it feels more and more like games industry work is a kind of blue collar work that happens at a keyboard, right? And the problem is that education for blue collar work is not at a university level, and the culture around education for blue collar work is in a different style, right? You have a journeymanship program or a trade school or something of that nature, and those places are places where education about workers' rights and unionization and the history of unions is brought forward. But because it's in a university setting here, there's that additional challenge that you've got an education model that does not match with the realities of a workforce, and they're in conflict with each other. So you're not getting the full culture that backs blue-collar work. Would you say that that's fair?
Oh my God, dude, that was awesome. Like, I'm right there with you. I'm like, yes, keep going. Yeah, and it's a little bit heartbreaking because I see a lot of people want to join the game industry because they like playing games. And we don't talk enough about the difference that playing games is not the same as making games. And that's something that universities
very true.
Yeah, no,
So
exactly. Universities
so
are so guilty of this. And going back to the G4, I remember being in high school, going and seeing G4 being really pumped, and seeing in less than 5 minutes different institutes and universities, selling you courses, bachelor's, associates. And at least when I grew up in the 2000s, right? So we didn't have the information, we didn't have social media as we have it today. So you trusted those institutions. That's another thing. We trust in those institutions. But now that we have social media, that we have like stuff like Twitch, Discord, we can, I think, elderly people like that have been in this industry, the elders can go and say, let me tell you about my experience so you don't get
Let me show
affected
you my
the same
war
way."
wounds here
Right.
and here.
Right.
and
Literally,
here.
yes, it is, man. Because you don't want other people to go through the bad experience that you went through. Because I don't really subscribe to the whole thing of everybody needs to go through their licks, because that's a very toxic mentality.
Yeah.
And our responsibility, if you have multiple years in the game industry, is to educate, guide, and mentor.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ben, Ben had thoughts. Yeah, go.
And I wanted to add on that. There's like, and with like there's very much that like that route of like the public education method, creating this increased amount of people. But then now again, adding on to social media, adding on to kind of like publicly available resources. Now we're seeing the average person getting educated on how to get into games, finding out industry resources, through GDC, through Noman, a little bit of SIGGRAPH too as well.
Yeah.
Things like
Or
that.
even just game jams or other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they're just like, we're seeing a huge like wave of basically these kind of self-educated, self-taught, where we're not getting these kind of people that are like they know about a lot of these like practices of crunch, of the like of these kind of mistreatments that we've kind of seen, but they don't know how it's done exactly. They don't have like the mentorship or the kind of like one-to-one before even going into it. Yeah, like they're experiencing things that they're experiencing these new problems through game jam scenarios, through these kind of like.
And a game jam is inherently crunch by its definition. Like you're signing up for like, hey, 48 hours, we're gonna, work our asses off to go make a thing.
We're not gonna sleep, we're not gonna bathe. Let's do this.
Right.
And it's like, and, like they're fun, but it's like there's a difference between like that's an entertainment like thing you do for fun, but it's not a career.
It's not a job.
Yeah, like you're not. Oh, you don't need to be jamming out your game at a professional level. Like you definitely do jam and have fun. Yeah, it's awesome, but not professionally.
Sorry, as a quick note for everybody in chat before it scrolls off, I threw up a link to one of our extra history episodes, The Battle of Blair Mountain, which literally talks about union busting about a century ago that involved machine guns and other, like, this has been going on a while. Yep. It is a different fight now than it used to be.
That is correct. Yeah. Although, amazingly enough, the Pinkertons are still involved. Why? Anyway.
I should
no. I need to give you a shout out. From a history point, that episode is amazing. Even my mom, history teacher, she loves it. And I use it constantly around game devs to explain the struggle that the working class has. For at this point, hundreds of years, because this goes all the way to medieval Europe and then to the Industrial Revolution, where we have the Pinkertons.
Yep, absolutely. Okay,
actually, we have another one. Oh, actually, I'll post it. Well, it's Alan. It's what do we call it? The Pinkertons, the Knights of Capitalism.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll throw that one in chat as well. Sorry, just wanted before it scrolled off through chat.
Absolutely.
Just for historical reference, it's been going on a while and we've covered it.
Right. Okay. So I guess I have another question, which is there something that makes now the right time to do this? Or is it just that there's now a critical mass of voices in this discussion? Or is there some watershed moment, like we were talking about, we're waiting for the newsies, right, to be carrying the banner? Is there something that makes now the right time to do this? Or is it just, we need this, it doesn't matter if it's the right time or not, it's the time that we have, let's do it?
I feel like we're late. In a way, I'm just being completely honest here. Like we're compared to other industries we've seen, film, TV, things like that, as well as stage workers, everything like that. We're pretty much within the first years, looking at movies specifically, the history of that. It's like the first 20 years or like 20 or 40 years, like they already got the union in that time range.
Wait, did movies really unionize that quickly? Because I always thought it took them longer.
Yeah, I might be wrong.
Maybe. I know it took theater a long time. It took them millennia.
Yeah, I think theater definitely would be a lot longer, but maybe I'm thinking more of like modern, like television, things like that. Sorry, I think I should have been more clear. But when it came to that, it transitioned into having a union pretty quickly in the span of it in a short amount of time, compared to what games have or games could have had. Essentially, that's
The reason why it was quicker is because it happened at a time that most Americans knew what unions were. They were familiar with the concept of unions, and people were for unionization. The view of it was very positive. So when everybody looks at this whole thing, oh, you want a good solid job, join a union. And those things were discussed in the table at dinner. And what better example than Disney and the animators when they went on strike? They had support, but this happened during a time that the support was very, very strong. Now, with unions, that support doesn't exist. But technically, since hot labor summer and since COVID, a lot of people have woken up and they have realized I'm expendable. They can do whatever they want to me. I need to stand up for myself, because if I don't speak, nobody else is going to speak for me. And we now have, in my opinion, the best outlook of unionization that we have currently have in the last 20 years. Because the last time we saw this was in the 70s, right before Reagan took power.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar historically, basically post-World War II up through Reagan, there was a huge uptick in unionization, and that led to a lot of the rise of the middle class in America with unionization and jobs. But there was a concerted attack by basically President Reagan and then the Republican Party as unions being anti-business, and support for them over the next then 30 to 40 years, well, starting then just ebbed under a constant barrage of unions are bad for business as just a talking like.
Yeah. So let's. I'm gonna inject some fact into the conversation, which I find fascinating. The first talkie, Jazz Singer, was published in 1927, and SAG was founded in 1933. But
that's the first talkie, but they'd been going on since.
Sure.
But okay, sorry.
I'm gonna mark talkies as like sort of the evolution of film away from sort of its proto. It's like nascent form into something that more closely resembles the film.
We can argue that point later, but carry on.
I'm happy to talk about all of that.
Yeah, we have guests. Carry on.
Right. Okay.
It's awesome.
I think that there's.
This is just how we like. Anyway,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I also think that the economic conditions of the country during the 30s might have had something to do with the overall move towards unionization at that time as well.
Yeah,
I can't imagine why the 30s would have a bunch of unions or anything. Anyway,
let's see. Confluence of World War I, the 1918 flu pandemic, which killed more people than World War I, if you didn't know, followed by the Great Depression.
Yeah, just a few things.
Period.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Okay, so it sounds like we're late. We got to do this sooner rather than later, and it feels very much like games, because they are so inherently tied to technological advancements, right, are moving at an accelerated pace, right? In my lifetime, we have gone from the original NES, right, to I have a computer that can ray trace Minecraft. Like in my house, right? Like that level.
Your thing of this can probably do 90% of that.
Right. Well, you have a thing in your pocket that's more powerful than the sum total of computing power that put humans on the moon.
Yep.
Right. And so that change.
And you use it for Twitter, for shame.
No, I don't. I use it for Blue Sky. Thank you very much.
That wasn't you. That was a general.
I know. I know. I'm giving you crap. I think
as you should.
I think
Twitter is dead.
Correct. The accelerating pace of change, right, which is 90s kids, or my 90s kids feel inherently in our bones, is also part of this, right? That it becomes difficult to grab a moment in an industry where everything is constantly evolving and accelerating. Right, because it's all tied to that, right? NVIDIA just announced that they've got some new chip that everyone wants for AI, and it's going to drive the next new wave of whatever. But that's a big technological advancement that's going to continue to progress the industry. Because even if they don't use it for AI, they're going to use it for like better VR headsets or better monitors or whatever, right? So like, I think that is also potentially a big part of it, is the accelerating pace of change. Right?
We need that. If my 10-year prediction on when AR will be mainstream is going to stand up.
Well, you just want an excuse to wear Google glasses.
No, I want an excuse. I want an excuse for never mind. Full AR. Google Glasses be damned.
Okay, so
Listen, we all want to live in the Matrix. You know, I'm disabled.
No.
I want to be
AR.
Jack
I
in
don't
the
want to live in the
Matrix.
Matrix.
That's cool.
no, I'm okay. I'm okay with knowing that, not knowing that I live in the Matrix. That's okay. So let's talk about sort of a weird.
Will, they started it.
Let's go.
Jeff
Sounds like we're Tron.
has a collection of these. It's great.
Oh, that's
okay,
cool. I love it.
So let's talk about this from a different angle. Okay. So the games industry is very product driven, right? It is incredibly product driven. We've talked about that and how that provides part of the obstacles, right? Do you think
And a very competitive market
yes
that is product driven?
correct, right? And
To fully frame that.
and sometimes those products don't compete because of things that are completely beyond their control. Looking at you, Horizon franchise, and your god's awful launch timetable.
Could we also add to that services? Because I feel that at this point we launch a product and we still need to support it for so many years, and it just becomes a service.
Right.
Like
and
regardless.
and it doesn't necessarily generate nearly as much profit after the initial launch as it does through
Consumer
patch.
expectation on what is delivered has continued to change over the years, which is one of the costs that we've seen rises in development cost, even as the tools have gotten better and allowed us to produce more in the same amount of time. It's just in the increasing sophistication of our consumers and what they expect out of their game on a per game basis and then support afterwards has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Quick summary.
do you think that in this competitive market where we're very product driven, how do you think unionization would affect the quality of those products, right? Because so Geoff has a lot of stories about, I'm going to call them war stories, right? About being in the trenches, about crunch, right? Which is sort of a thing to get a product to ship on time. And that is, there's a huge
Or even
amount.
just to ship.
Yeah, right. It's to ship at all. And so there's this, and part of that is to remain competitive in this industry, right? But that's obviously also a thing that takes a great toll on the workers and is one of the things that workers interested in unionizing are obviously very concerned about, right? And that's just one of many examples, I'm sure. What do you think the impacts of unionization on the quality of games is? Do you think do you think it's a non-factor? Do you think that union studios make better games? Do you think that union studios make worse games? It's very interesting because I think that will be, for better or worse, a major selling point of unions for or against in the industry because, again, unfortunately, tediously product driven, right?
I have an answer, but Ben, if you want to go first, because I already I love that question.
I think the one thing I would love to point out, or I like to think about, is consistency is key.
Yeah.
If it's steady development and it can be steady, or it can be planned ahead, while having the idea of maintaining that steadiness of what they need to go for, keep an eye on the scope, these are perfect reality. This is the perfect reality. We're not saying things can happen, problems come up. But things can continuously be steady, and we know the exact route, the pipeline. We're producing the product. We make sure that everything is hitting all the milestones, everything like that. Then we generally will see a higher quality product being made consistently, with everyone kind of not burning out, not kind of overextending themselves in a way that's going to create a problematic scenario where if someone's forced to or feels like they need to kind of do more than what they need to in a way, it's gonna damage them, or it can damage the entire pipeline and everything like that. I'm trying to think about any other better ways to put it, but mainly just any level of consistency that is no questions asked, you're just gonna have things done, will lead to a better product generally.
And I think that Grass in chat brings up a really great point that management scheduling around the assumption that you will crunch less. I think at this point, as long as we have firm launch dates for a piece of art, some amount of crunch is probably going to be more or less inevitable, even if it's just weekend before.
Definitely.
Right? Which is a reality of the industry that we're talking about,
But
right?
part of it too is some of the scope comes from the developers. Like
Sure.
half of the crunch I've been on is because the team collectively decided the game would not be good enough with the amount of time and or budget and or people they had, and kept trying to put more stuff in.
Right.
Like it isn't necessarily that it's management, though it absolutely can be. EA was famous for doing just that, like planning in crunches. But sometimes it's the devs themselves who are like, no, look at this cool new thing. Or, man, I just tried this iteration and it's a lot more fun, but it requires to rework all of this.
Right. And I think that there's two parts to that.
Oh.
One is that like it obviously drives devs to work on passion projects, right? And like when your work is your passion, then all of this gets real messy, right? About like boundaries between the amount of time you work, right? I'm a Twitch streamer. I know a little bit about that.
Obsessive.
Just a touch. You don't want to know how long the scene took last night. And then on the other hand, I'm going to push back. I'm going to say that part of management's job is to help keep devs from scope creeping.
Oh, the best producers I have kill dreams every day.
Just murder, right, yeah, exactly. Like, I know you have a better idea, but we have to rebuild the entire game. No, we're going with this thing. We'll use that for the sequel. It'll be fine, right?
My God, I love that from production. I've seen that in Extra Credit, and I absolutely love it because it's a reality. But right now, what I could say is that, yes, sometimes as dev, we're overly ambitious. We have, like, look at the best example that I know is Ken Levine with BioShock, that type of thing that is a visionary, it's an auteur, it's work of art. And that's the case on its own. But right now, what we're facing is that developers are following mandates by management and by executive to create a product that will generate a revenue stream that year after year they can count on to elevate the stocks of the shareholders. And I have no beef against Warner Brothers, but the biggest game right now that comes to mind is the Suicide Squad. You know, look at that game. That game right now is doing horribly. And
well, it also got passed between a couple of studio. Well, yes, the game is doing horribly.
No. The original version of that game is amazing. I talked to people from Rocksteady and from other studios that went through that game because it's almost a 10-year dev process, multiple iterations and incarnations. But the whole thing is that there was a mandate, and you can go with the main CEO of Warner Brothers that they're still betting on live service. Why? Because that assures a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time for the shareholders. And we're gonna into this weird hyper-capitalist system, right? Where it doesn't matter if it's finished, it doesn't matter if you bleed, it doesn't matter. We need to launch this product on this day, because if we're not profitable, we're not doing the right thing. Screw everybody else.
Well,
I'll give a little pushback on that. You know, if you're like, here's your budget, you know, you have X to do X, this gets you to this far. There are also a lot of teams who are like, let's make more than that is scoped for. Like, but in general, like, there is never infinite budget. And without infinite budget, there's never infinite time. Because budget directly relates to ability to pay people.
Yeah.
If I could, real quick,
Please.
sorry. What we're talking about really is the ability to have consent over this stuff.
Yes.
And not make it a mandatory decision without our input.
Yep.
So if devs want to put in that extra work, they can, but it's not because of management requiring them to without their consent. And I think something else that somebody in the chat touched on was it Grass Vortex? Yeah, management being able to schedule and plan better. One of the things that Chris Pernosky, who was the president at Titmouse when we organized, still is, but when we organized, he said, this is going to be great because I will be able to budget and schedule better. So it's, and what you're talking about, Geoff, is like, you're right, there's not an infinite amount of money. But when you're budgeting and scheduling these projects, you will have a better ability to do so. When you know exactly what everyone should be paid, and exactly what the parameters are that you need to get the job done, as opposed to it being somewhat vague and ambiguous and up to negotiating individually with your workers to see who will accept less.
Having come from my first job, which was at Sony, but when we went independent and got bought by Sony again, like our CEO was famous for negotiating differently with different people, and it being a firing offense to talk about your salary. Like I started as a temp worker at Sony that only got brought on full time because the overtime they were having to pay us temps based on the project was more than it was to put us on salary. Like I went through that whole arc, like coming in. So I recognize and appreciate all of that. I
do also want to say that it is illegal for your boss to fire you for talking about your salary. Just FYI for everyone in the chat.
Yeah.
I mentioned from a time in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. And it just that part of American work culture is weird. That part is super like weird, and like we could literally do an entire hour on that, but we're not gonna. By the way, Carlos built me a ladder, and I'm gonna double tap the elbow and drop it real quick. Just as a reminder, Suicide Squad currently has 231 people in game with a 24-hour peak of 286 on Steam.
For Twitch, okay.
No, on Steam.
On Steam.
Oh, is it?
That's the player count.
That's the player count on Steam.
It's funny. A lot of the live service games remind me of. I have this segment that I keep threatening to write at some point called the Everything Will Be, which is all the times in the industry I've heard everything's going to be like. My first game was an MMO. And the amount of I heard from other studios like, wow, every game's now going to be an MMO. And as MMO devs, we're like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
This is a very certain kind of game. And, everything's going to be a mobile game, a console game. Everything's going to be an NFT game. Everything's going to be VR. Everything's going to be AR. Like all of these things that everybody hops onto, like everything's going to be a live service game. No, not everything needs to be League of Legends. Not everything needs to be Destiny. There are certain, I want to go play my Slay the Spires. I want to go play my Civilizations. I want to go play my other kinds of games that don't necessarily need that kind of thing.
Yep.
Though that works very well for certain kinds of games.
And I think that there is...
MOBAs.
Chrissy's having some mic problems.
Will, can you mute her for a second?
I can.
There we go.
So, the big... had a thought is a good thought. Part of the problem is that and we've seen a couple of examples of this, right? Of how the idea of maximizing corporate profit leading to trend chasing causes a lot of long-term issues, right? What the heck was I can never remember the name of it. Chat will know it immediately. We'll let chat do this one. Hey, Brad, what's the name of the failed Amazon Studios hero shooter that absolutely evaporated into thin air and everyone forgot that it existed?
Lord.
Right?
I remember. Oh my God.
Right? Crucible.
Crucible.
Thank you. By the way, we call our chat Brad. Brad is all the one Gestalt entity that is all of chat. They speak as a gibbering mouther.
We are one. We're union.
Right. Yeah.
Legion.
So
and as a quick note, if you haven't seen it, YouTube chat is therefore called Janet.
Yeah, correct. So that kind of thing, and I think that directly acts against the sort of impulse to auteur, like BioShock, right? I know someone who's playing the remaster of BioShock in 2024.
That's awesome.
And that game could vote in this year's election. Like, that kind of thing holds up, and it feels like we're no longer interested in making the industry about that kind of art. We're interested in trend chasing, just like Geoff said, with the everything will be, right? Everything's going to be live service. We're going to chase.
But everything's always been that way for a while.
Sure.
It's the auteurs operate within that, regardless, somehow manage to drag something kicking and screaming into existence, even with that. Because like the everything will be trend has been going on for 25 years that I know of, probably longer.
I think it has achieved more dominance as more and more stuff has gotten more and more
I think that's just your recency bias talking.
Ooh, okay.
I
All right,
wouldn't say it's recency, because if you
Mm.
compare this to Hollywood, it's the same thing as superhero movies. Look at Marvel, look at DC, trying to follow the trends, because you're just following the money. That's the whole point. The whole point here is following the money.
Mhm.
And this is leading to, like Ben just said, like burnout, and a lot of industry experts just quitting, leaving, changing. And this exacerbates the problem during production. Like, again, Suicide Squad, it was a rotating staff, constantly in and out, in and out, in and out. Why? Because it was so much pressure, so many changes, and that affected the end product. So if we can put a stop to that, that would be amazing. We can have, again, better quality. And for a lack of better word, we can't, we need people that understand the industry to be on top. Because the biggest game that Warner Brothers released wasn't Suicide Squad, it was Hogwarts Legacy.
Yeah.
It wasn't a live service game.
Yeah, it was a single player, and I think that's a really good point. That there's and I think if we had this discussion with studios in the language of, so if you keep these people around, you're more likely to deliver the game on time and on or under budget, because you're not rotating in fresh people that are cheaper short term, right? Like,
I'll also vote on this for better research. Like, one of the big things when I was running my research studio, EDAR, that like all the devs initially would fear, it's like market research is going to come in and tell us a thing, and I'd be like, let me tell you the secret. You know what's going to happen? We're going to vet your game, and then you can tell anybody who comes in, fuck off. It's been vetted. This is going to make money. Don't bother us. And they go,
great.
Okay.
Analytics get into
like,
that.
If you can do it, like every dev studio I know has 10 games they want to make for the one that they're working on.
Yes.
If they could basically be like, here, let's pitch 5 things we want to make. Okay, here's the one with the highest chance of success, so we can get that independently vetted so that nobody can come in and tell us to fuck around with the design later. And, and we can say, go away, this is good. Like, how is that not your perfect thing as a dev studio? It gives you your armor against the people who want to come in and meddle, to be like, we're making a viable product. Go away, leave us alone.
Baldur's Gate 3 is the one that chat's bringing up, which I think is an absolute banger of an example. Although I will also point out, and this does happen every time we start talking about these things, and Geoff brought it up earlier, there's a lot of survivorship bias, and there's a lot of exception that disproves the rule kind of stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like Hollow Knight, right? Not every Metroidvania is going to be Hollow Knight. In fact, the vast majority of them will not be. In fact, the only one that comes to mind that came close in its era was Ori, and Ori was a totally different vibe, right? So like, I think that
good research though can take that into account.
Good research can take that into account.
We need good research, definitely. We need to do a statistic or a study about this, because right now the best example that I'm gonna throw out there is Redfall and Arcane. Like,
I should probably unmute Chrissy, by the way, if you.
I did.
Okay.
She's not muted on my side. Hey, Chrissy, say words. Ooh. Let's see.
It may be on your side then, but
yeah, it's not on my side.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, it's funny. No matter how, there's what you can plan, and then there's what you find along the way.
Yes.
Like, if you could plan the perfect thing, everybody would be making it. Like, but there's also one of my earliest memories of this that later led to me, helping form the research studio, was my very first GDC, which was, I think, 99. Like, I ended up going to an offsite party there, like bussing us off, and I was sitting next to some random dev, like, hey, cool, what are you working on? He's like, I'm working on the Dukes of Hazzard video game. Like, really? We're like, yeah, our studio, we landed the brand, we got the license, so-and-so, and I was listening to him talk. I was listening to the size of the team, and my mind was like, you guys have spent more on the license and your team than your game can have any hope of making. Like, I was looking at a studio that was going to go out of business because they were making something that not enough people would buy. Like, that's the kind of research you need to know ahead of, like, there's stuff that if they'd done a very simple check, they would have been like, oh, and it did. Their studio put out that game and went out of business. Like, there's a certain amount of diligence that it is a responsible thing as a group running or pitching a game to do, to make sure that everything works and you're not marching people off a cliff.
Yeah, absolutely.
again-
So I'm gonna
Sorry, go
focus
ahead,
this real
Ben.
quick because we got about 40 minutes left, and I have a big question.
All
I
right.
have a very big question. So we've talked about.
Oh, yes. I'm just kidding.
Finally, we can hear you. Awesome.
Okay.
Yep.
Hey.
Okay. So Chrissy's desynced, and it's gonna bother me, and I'm gonna fix it in a second. Hold that thought. We've talked a lot about like the whys and the industry stuff. Let's talk about concrete stuff. What's the plan, right? Pitch us this plan, right? How is this going to happen, right? Are we waiting for the Newsies moment? Are we, is it the Midnight Bark, the Beacons of Minas Tirith? Like where are we at for?
Hold off on that. Sync Chrissy up for a second. I hear my cat's about to knock over something. I need to stop them from that. Like, I want to hear the start of this. So let's get the fixes going, then go.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Water break.
Water break.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Technical difficulties.
Woo! And we don't even have Tom Scott.
I'm having a blast with this.
Yeah.
Who wants to play piano?
Now, y'all are so insightful that, oh my God, I'm nerding out right now hearing y'all's opinions and stories. It's like so cool.
We try. We do try. Okay. That's cool. I've got all that. Let's do this. Chrissy, say words.
How about now?
No.
Say words?
You're like a full second desyncing. I don't know why. Oh, this is amazing.
Should I, if I left and came back, would it fuck things up?
No, go for it. That's actually the beauty of Ninja.
Yeah.
All right, I'll be right back.
That could fix it all.
Yeah. Okay.
Whoa! It didn't even break the layout.
No, it
That's what
doesn't
you're
break the
talking
layout because I have we get to talk tech with Ben. So this isn't canvassed as cuts. Each of you individually is your own browser source.
Oh,
And
okay, that makes sense.
And for the recording, each of you, because you're on your own browser source, is also audio channeled to your own. Well, two of you are doubled because there's 5 of us, and I need an additional audio channel. But you can each be in your own audio channel, so that I have the composite that feeds to Twitch. And if we wanted to audio mix this later, we could individually for each person.
That's so cool.
Will is our badass. This is how we're actually able to do some live stream, like let's play or actual plays and other things, is because after doing our first one, we're like, Will, you just run production and make it badass. And he's like, hold my, what are you drinking now?
Monster. It's probably Monster.
Yeah, hold my Baja Blast. And
yeah. All right, Chrissy, try now.
Say words.
Perfect. We're fixed.
Okay.
All right, cool. So let's ask this question again.
yeah.
Great.
Friends, you have laid out the case for why unionization is important. We've talked about the state of the industry and why it's the right time. And it might be cold pizza, but it's still pizza to form unions. What's the plan? If let's assume, by the way, for the sake of this layout, that every vote goes your way, that that there's no obstruction, there's no union busting, that the Pinkertons remain safely out of sight, that like everything goes perfectly your plan. What is that plan?
Unrealistic.
No. Okay, starry-eyed philosopher and dreamer, pitch me your unrealistic, because I want to live in that world.
And do we get to sing Les Mis as we do it?
Yeah, right.
Awesome.
Well, I mean, the reality is that we're not gonna be able to win this without with every employer being like, yep, sure.
Yeah, for sure.
The reason, I mean, I say this all the time. It's like my catchphrase. I'm going to get it tattooed on my forehead or something. But if it was easy, we would have done it already.
Sure.
This is not the easiest thing in the world to do. We have rights in this country and we have laws that we have to follow in order to make sure that we win our union. It is a complicated process. It takes time. And ultimately, how that happens is I can put it in layman's terms just to make it like seem very easy up front, but like there are challenges along the way. But that is also why you would want to partner with an already established union to form your union, because you then have the backing to support you through that effort and give you the legal representation that you might need. So the way that unions are formed, for anybody in the chat who doesn't know, it starts with you. It starts with a person who is working at a place and says, I think a union would be a great thing for me and my coworkers. And they start talking to their coworkers. You start with people that you know and trust. You start with people that you have a pretty good feeling are in line with what you think. Because ultimately what you want to do is form what's called an organizing committee. And that organizing committee are the folks who are dedicated to finding out if you have what's called a supermajority of support at your studio. A supermajority is anything over 60%, because it's well over just 50. And the reason that you want to have a supermajority is that if you form your union, you march on your boss, you tell your boss you want to be a union, they have two options. And one of those options is like that glorious utopia of voluntary recognition where your boss just says, yep, sure, I believe you. We did achieve that at Titmouse in New York. So it's not an unattainable or unreachable goal. And the more support you have at your studio, the more likely your boss is to just wave the white flag and say, let's get to negotiating. But the other option they have is to force you to a vote, which means you vote twice. So you say, yes, I want my union. You sign an authorization card. And then your boss says, well, I don't believe you that you want to form a union. I think these cards are fake. And you have to vote with the National Labor Relations Board, which is a neutral government body. So you vote again, but that could take time. Depending upon the way that the ballot is given, either in person, hybrid, or through mail, it could take a month and a half, possibly even 2 months to actually have the ballots counted. And that gives your boss a very large window of opportunity to launch an anti-union campaign, meaning they're going to try to change your mind. They're going to try to convince you not to vote yes for your union. But if we have that supermajority of support, you are more likely to continue to win as opposed to lose if it's a slim margin that you've got your support by. But all of this is with our support. I would be helping y'all out. I'd meet with you weekly to go, and the other folks on my organizing team at the IATSE. We'd be meeting with you weekly to talk strategy, who talks to who, when to talk to them, how to talk to them. We'll train you on all the things that you need to know, not that this is secret information. A lot of our training stuff is available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/IATSENY. If you scan that QR code in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, it'll take you to a little link that'll give you all of the information and all of the resources that we have for organizing, because this is stuff that you need to know. It's not like we're trying to gatekeep it. We're not trying to keep it secret. Sure. We're talking about it here. We talk about it every Thursday at 4 p.m. on our own Twitch channel.
Let's plug.
Yeah, but we also have, like, the biggest part of this is educating people, because if you don't know how to do it, then you're not going to do it. Yeah. You know, the crying on Twitter, the crying out on Twitter for unionization now, and then nothing happens. It's because nobody knows what to do. You call out for it and you hope that that's the thing that's going to do it. But the change has to come from you. The change comes from the workers themselves. A union's not formed if the workers don't want it. So if 60% of you don't want a union, well, you don't get a union. Yep. But if 60% of you do, then you get a union.
Right.
Democratic.
So okay, so that's a union at a studio, right? We're at a mythical studio that's making a mythical video game called Technomancer, and Geoff and I are working on it, and I convinced Geoff to sign the union card, and we get the majority and all of that. So is that how does that fit into this picture, like we were talking about earlier about the national local? How does that, where does that, like, it feels like there's a step, and it doesn't seem like a huge step. It doesn't feel like an insurmountable leap of faith, but it does feel like there's a step between, like, me and all of my friends who are working on this game together have this deal where we're going to collectively bargain directly with management, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with game workers nationwide in, working on this standard of treatment for everyone that seems to be,
Standardization, yeah.
yeah, right. That seems to be such a core part of your desired outcome.
So, yes, we're at the very beginning here, right? Right now, under the IATSE, we've got one studio in Rochester, New York called Working Man Interactive. It's a very small studio of about 20 workers who have formed a game worker union with the IATSE. So we have not yet chartered that brand new game worker local, and we're still working on their first contract. So again, we're very much in the beginning of this. It's not something that will happen overnight, but the more people who are doing it, the more people who are forming unions at their studios, the sooner we can charter that local, and the sooner that we can form what's called a master agreement, which again is similar to what like the Animation Guild has. So every studio has its own collective bargaining agreement, which is their own contract, because every studio operates differently. But the master agreement is ultimately what covers everyone everywhere. And we can't do it with just one employer. We need a few. They all have to be contributing in order to help pay for the healthcare coverages and the pension plans for all of the workers, if that's what we negotiate anyway. But that would be the ultimate goal, is to form that master agreement that applies industry-wide so that standards are set for workers, again, working at different studios, but the individual collective bargaining agreements are what govern the individual studios and apply to their specific pipelines and the needs of the workers of that studio. If you check out the Animation Guild's website at theanimationguild.org, you can read all the contracts. So you can read the current master agreement, which is up for negotiations this summer. Their agreement expires, I believe, July 31st. It might be July 31st. It might be August 31st. I can't remember. Sometime over the summer, yes. And there are also the individual collective bargaining agreements with like Nickelodeon and Titmouse and DreamWorks and Disney. And there's even like side letters for what's considered new media, which is like streaming services and things like that. It's all very complicated, but that's the ultimate goal, is to set the standards that are super important to everyone everywhere and have applicable contracts for individual studios.
So if I was going to sum this up to make sure I understood it, if we did this a decade from now, as a designer, if I was working on a game, I might have both a thing for the studio I'm working at, as well as which would be individually negotiated, as well as a more overarching part that we're under, which has a broader set of, I'll just call them standards. So it's like, I'm part of I don't know if it would be Designers Guild or like whatever it is, but I'd be part of both the studio I'm working on our Heckmanmancer game, as well as something for my discipline or a broad group discipline, which kind of sets a broader level blanket over that.
Yes, but the master agreement applies to everyone working in games. So it's not just specific to your discipline. There would be things within that agreement that are specific to your discipline, like wage scales. If there are very specific things about your job that are only applicable to you and there need to be things negotiated about them, then that would be included. And that would probably be within the individual contract, like the collective bargaining agreement, as opposed to the master agreement for that studio. But you wouldn't, we're not trying to divide people by job classification because we have power in numbers. So the more of us that come together, the better we can negotiate for. So all of us coming together at once at a studio anyway, not every single game worker in the country all at once, because that would be a massive undertaking. And maybe you'd see it in a decade.
Challenge accepted.
All right, Will, let's do this.
It's tricky too, because a lot of this is international on development. Now that we have remote ability to work remotely, even if your studio is based, if I started up a studio tomorrow, hell, take extra credits. I'm in San Diego. Matt, our showrunner's in New York. Our lead writer's in Hong Kong for history. One of our main artists is in Madrid. Our twin art brothers working are in, I think, Florida now. I think they moved.
But like that's part of the point. We literally don't know where they live because it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right. And that's part of the organizational challenge.
But if we were a studio for that, we might fall into multiple different jurisdictions.
Yes.
Like Rob in Hong Kong or David in Madrid might be part of different groups that we would be working with together. And part of the internationalization of creative projects makes some of this even more tricky than it would have been, say, even 20 years ago.
It is tricky, but it's not impossible, because
I'm just letting people know it's hard.
To blow your mind, each states in the United States have different union laws. Like, look at Texas, it's not the same as California. So that challenge is going to be there from day one. But by coming together and having those discussions, we can have the major agreement that I look at it as the 10 Commandments. Stuff that is so obvious that we should all implement. And in there, we can also discuss remote work, people that are overseas, different places. Like we were been saying, this is so early on that would be a little bit later on, because right now we're in the grass movement. We're in the movement of trying to break the fear of people talking about unions. Because right now, like, a lot of people are interested. They want to join. They want to do something. But the fear of losing their jobs also stops them, because they don't want to be marginalized. The game industry is a place that has so many problems with toxicity, and specifically with minorities, that they don't need that. They don't need that extra weight, right? So it makes it challenging to be a grassroots movement. Again, not impossible, but now we're starting to get that flow back. We're starting to get that pushback.
And as much as it starts at the bottom, it also starts at the top. Like, the best crunch I ever had was in, I think, 2003 or 4 at Monolith Productions, where my team, I was working on a DC Comics game and they were working on The Matrix. And they kept having, because of the deal, they kept having things change on them, because Ubisoft was also somehow a partner in it, and Ubisoft kept asking for different things. But management would negotiate, and then they'd come in and they'd say, hey, we are going to be crunching starting 2 weeks from now, and we're going to be crunching for 2 weeks, or until we can hit this one thing that we're done with. That gave everybody time to tell their families about it, to plan it into their stuff. They knew what the goal was, and that the goalpost wasn't going to be moving on them. It was, we have bumped into a problem. We will not be starting tomorrow. This isn't, hey, everybody, your weekend is just killed. They'd give lots of advance notice, and they'd tell you when it would stop, either by a certain amount of time, or if we could finish the stuff earlier, by achieving this one thing.
Are you just describing agile sprints? I feel like you're just describing agile sprints.
The agile wasn't a thing. It didn't exist at that point. But like, that was the single best crunch, because it was not the rolling, ongoing crunch that stopped and started intermittently, or just the studio telling you, hey, it's 12-hour days until we say it's not.
Right.
It was here's the stuff ahead of time. And when I ran my own studios, that was like what I would, we'd do when occasionally we bumped into things, is we'd talk about it way beforehand. And we'd, ask if anybody had any other solutions or ways we could do it. And if not, it would be a thing that we collectively planned together to stay on task, because I always ran small, 20 to 50 person studios. And the people there could come to a consensus. There are ways to do it well.
Yes.
And that is, but those end up almost always being top led. So I think it really is a combination of the grassroots up, but also the top group embracing and saying, we can make this a more sustainable place to work. And all of the good studios I've worked at, or like the people I talked to who came up through the game industry, that's in their interest, because they don't want the industry to be the way it was when they were young. They went through all of that, and they're like, we want this to be a better place. We want people to have families. And so there are studios out there very much embracing these concepts from a top-down perspective, because they want to leave the industry a better place than when it started. And I feel like if we can get that from the top, and the grassroots coming up from the bottom, I think there's a lot of hope to meet.
Yeah, to meet in the middle. Yeah. Again, the conversation part. That's definitely, because at the end of the day, we're all blue-collar workers. We're all in the same struggle. We're all facing the same challenges. We're all trying to make good games, because nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to do a bad game.
That's my line. You stole my line.
Let's go, baby. Let's go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's important what you're talking about, though, Geoff. Like that stuff, that's awesome, and clearly it worked for you and your workers. Let's make it the standard and make it
For
so that
everybody.
employers are contractually obligated to follow these rules,
Yeah.
so that everybody
board
can
for that.
have that. You
Right.
know,
And I think the interesting part is that that critical mass that you've been talking about, right? We need a critical mass of studios, so you need critical mass at several junctures, right? You need a critical mass of determination in one person to start a conversation. And then they need to gather a critical mass of people together to be able to approach your boss and be like, yo, we're going to form a union, right? And then you need a critical mass of those studios to come together to form this master agreement. And that feels like if we can get enough people to just sign on, because it's like Carlos was saying, that very base level, like, well, yeah, of course, right? Like, why would anyone not sign this? Of course I'm going to sign this thing that says, you know, no crunching for more than 2 months in a stretch, or what, you know, whatever people come to. I think that feels like a very positive way to go about it, and it feels like it's less adversarial, which I think is the portrayal of unionization that a lot of people get in American media, is that it's highly adversarial every step of the way. And I think a lot of it
well, because you're getting that news from the media,
correct. And we're also
know?
getting that news about companies that are very adversarial, right? The number one place that we get news about unionization on the regular.
they're not going to cover it if there's no story, which the story is just everybody met amicably and agreed.
Right.
Sorry for interrupting. Real fast.
That's a one-line mention as opposed to a story.
Yeah.
Apologies. How much time do we have left?
We have like 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. I'm gonna jump and be back. I need to use the bathroom.
Yeah. Do your thing.
Just focus, and I just went through 3 bottles to not get dry.
Carlos, I hear you. Actually, Chrissy, one of the things you said to me early on that I think was the most interesting to me, and this is as somebody who has run a couple of studios at this point, is, you know, coming in on the, you know, it's a negotiation, you know. This is to make everybody's, lives better, because I think just I listen to a lot of media. This is just part of who I am, and so I do pick up part of the perception that just on the way I hear things presented, unionization does sound a lot more adversarial for trying to run a thing, and like everything I've ever run, it's just like I want it to run smoothly. I want everybody to be in, to have a good lifestyle, and I want us to all get stuff done. And so, you know, coming in on the, you know, this is a negotiation, you know, we're here to make everybody's lives better. We're not in here, you know, we're here to talk, not to dictate. Like, as soon as you said that, my mind was like, oh, this sounds much more interesting. Like, that little bit of contextualization for me went a really long way. And just like, as you're talking to people, like, that was my turning point on stream. It was like, where I'm like, oh, this is, you know, this is a partnership. And like billing as a partnership, I think, takes a lot of the scare out that some people might have, especially those in more senior management roles at studios, because for a lot of them, they're also not the final arbiter of when things are. They're, you know, even if you're the head of gaming at, say, Warner Brothers, you're not running Warner Brothers. You know, you're still a division head reporting.
Zaslav.
Yeah, reporting in with all these other division heads to the president of, you know, and for them to the board. So, you know, coming in and saying, you know, we're here, you know, to put a cooperative thing together that's going to make everybody's lives better, you know, increase worker retention so that, you know, you lose less institutional knowledge, you know, you're able to carry on with more uninterrupted schedules, and in the long term get things done better, you know, which is done through improving conditions and a couple of other things. You know, that's a thing that any reasonable strategist can look at and be like, oh, I see a strategy. You know, I see the short-term tactics. I see the long-term strategy. How do, you know, that a lot of it to me is the framing, because the framing and the context is always so important on these things.
Yeah, I think a thing that like also comes from a lot of workers is that you have to be abused to want to form a union, and that's not true at all. And I'm not saying that when you're very comfortable sitting in your cushy chair and you're making a ton of money that you're going to necessarily be inside like enlightened to want to form one, but it doesn't have to come from a place of abuse, because like I said, this is collaborative. You can say, I love working here, and you should want to like ultimately make the place where you're working the best that it could be. You could be sitting in your chair and like, I love working at this job and I don't want anything about this to change. How do I prevent my employer from suddenly taking away my awesome retirement plan? How do I prevent my employer from suddenly deciding that our bonuses are going to be cut in half this year? How do I make it so that I have a say in the way that things happen here, to make sure that I'm taken care of too, so that the things that I love about this place aren't just taken away from me? I think that is also like a huge thing for people to keep in their pocket, because you don't have to be angry. You don't have to be mad. You don't have to be coming from a place where you spent 13 years at a company and they treated you like crap. You know?
I think in this respect, IT is a lot, unions are a lot like IT. When you need an IT department is not the time to be forming an IT department. You form an IT department when you don't need an IT department, so that you continue to not need an IT department, right? Like that as someone who's worked in situations where like there's all of a sudden a problem, right? Capital P, problem. Now I have to do a thing, right? That's not the time for them to be like, well, we're decided that we're adding this to your responsibility. No. I need to know about that ahead of time, so that we can, it's preventative maintenance, right? It's that collaboration, and so it's the ongoing consent of the people who are working there. It's this open communication, and it's rectifying a power imbalance, really, that like is not often understood, right? That there is balance in the relationship between employees and the employer, as long as it's all the employees and the employer, because each individual employee doesn't have that same balance of power, right? So it's rectifying that power imbalance to have this ongoing, consistent consent relationship between worker and employer, I think. And that's always just like, it feels like good practice to me. Like it just makes sense. It's just like, why, I don't know. I am the kind of person who's sitting in my comfy chair, and like if I was making a metric ton of money, I would still be like, man, unionization sounds great. And then you'd see like the thought bubble appear, and it would just be a bunch of people on a picket line. It would be great.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, you're also atypical on that, I think. I think Chrissy is probably closer. Like, it takes us, you should be thinking about it all the time, but, you know, let's look at Maslow talks a lot about, you know, when you're in more imminent danger, you're looking for the solution to that than when you're higher up.
I'm very aware that I'm atypical. When the lotto hit $1 billion, that's billion with a B, folks. And we were talking about the very interesting pipe dream of what if you won $1 billion or whatever the cash payout is, right? Most people were like, I would do all of these sensible things. And I literally said, and I'm willing to bet there's a clip of it somewhere, that I would fill duffel bags with cash and drive around major cities and huck duffel bags of cash at picket lines. Right?
And you'd probably still be a millionaire.
That's what gets me my kicks. So, like, I know I'm not normal. You don't have to, like...
I don't think you'd be able to run out of money.
I don't think I would either. Interest is a hell of a drug. So...
There's a saying, power doesn't corrupt, power reveals.
Yeah.
You know, and it shows the character, even if it seems obvious. That's the whole thing.
Yeah. All right. I think that is a very good place for us to start wrapping up our conversation. So... chat, what do you think? Are you now, okay. Now I know none of you, like very few of you needed convincing when we started this. Okay. Very few of you were like, grumble, I hate unions.
Can somebody throw up a poll? I'd be really curious to see.
Yes. Would you vote yes for a union today?
Democracy.
If there was a vote today, would you vote yes?
I'd even be willing to back it up some. General view of unions, you know, positive, neutral, negative.
Unions?
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
Let's start at a super high level, because I'm curious for the people currently sitting in chat, what their view was at the beginning of
All All right,
Yeah.
so there's a 3-minute poll. Unions, yes, no, please vote now in your streams.
Well,
Brad,
one day we're going to make the titles a little more clear so that I can help. But yes.
yeah. I had a thought. It was a good thought. What if you're standing? Stop it. We talked a lot about grand plans. Is there, and we talked a lot about the short-term work that people in the games industry can do right now. There's a link, and there's all kinds of resources, and you can, you can do this. Is it plural? Did I make it plural? Did I make it singular? Can I type today?
Gameworkers.org.
Yeah. There you go. There's the command with all of the stuff and all of the.
Beautiful.
Will, what's the QR code pointing to over there?
This is pointing to the link page.
Link
right?
up top. Yeah. Link up top /Gameworkers. It has our
All of
zine.
the-
It has our link to our Twitch. It has a link to our website. It has a link to our YouTube. It has a link to our GDC panel from this past year. It has a link to get in touch with us so that, yes, look
QR
at
code
that.
works.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for
if
testing,
you,
Geoff. I totally didn't. I actually.
if you're
legit-
working somewhere and you want to form a union or you're just interested in learning more, you can get in touch with us through that link. But it has to start with the workers. As much as I am out here and Carlos is out here and Ben is out here and Will is out here and Geoff is out here and we're all talking about this, it doesn't happen if there isn't a person at a studio who wants to make that change and get it started. Because as much as I'd love to walk in, plant a flag, and say this is a union shop now, it unfortunately doesn't work that way.
Wait, doesn't? You can't just kick in the door and then
No.
like wave the like the big
No,
old
it's not an
banner?
insurrection.
It's a
not January 6th.
democratic process.
It is a democratic.
Oh, Chrissy. Oh, I wish you could be here on a Wednesday night. We would have so much fun.
I'm happy to come back. Have me anytime.
Wednesday night.
That
for
is
those
when
of-
the Extra Politics talk show is going on.
And that
Nice.
one is possesses fewer hinges than this one does, generally speaking. Yeah,
I just want to say that according to the poll, we've won our union with 90% support.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, though
The chat union.
right, Brad is now unionized. You may present to me, your
Chat.
overlord, your demands.
Yeah, let's set bargaining dates with Will and Geoff.
Nice.
So,
Chat demands more, let's see, more cats.
I just gave them a cat. Didn't you see the
know.
cat?
Extra
What more do you
icons.
want?
except Carlos, we're now net 0 cats because you brought in a cat and my cat left.
Okay, so we're not even in the
Right,
black.
we're breaking
in the
even on
we're-
cats.
Okay.
You gotta pay your dues.
Oh, I had a really good thought, and it left my tiny, very tired brain. It
Oh,
was
Will.
about
French fries?
We were wrapping
Broside
up.
and Lord of the Broshin. What?
Pretzels?
It was about neither of those. One of them I
Oh.
can't have.
Lattes? Right after this, we definitely need more
Not
latte.
helping, Jeff.
I want to make a matcha.
Not helping. Do you get paid in questions to ask? Yes, totally. Okay, Matt's bringing a cat for our next segment, so that'll be good.
Good.
Sick.
Okay, so we've...
go
ahead.
I had it.
Okay.
So, we're talking about what individual people are doing. Is there anything big upcoming in this sphere, that any of you really want to brag about, really want to pitch, really want to tell people to watch the news for? Are there any major votes? Is there anything that you can talk about that you think concretely that people who aren't members of, who aren't game developers, right? Because we have a really weird cross-sectional community full of people, some of whom are developers, some of whom are just really passionate. What can people who aren't developers do to help? That was the question, and I even wrote it down. Right?
Ooh.
That's an amazing question. All right, Ben, you want to go for that one?
Yeah.
No. Off the top of my head, I would say just bring awareness. If you know someone that is in the game industry like that, gameworkers.org, I always just say that to everyone. Like, if you never know when you need that link, and that's that's how I found it. Someone in the animation industry knew about that link, and that's how I found out. So definitely gameworkers.org.
Okay, great. Carlos?
Share the link.
Yeah.
Tune into our Twitch. We're on at 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern on Thursday nights. We'll be there talking. Tonight, we're just going to be restreaming this stream.
Yeah.
Yep, I will get you the file.
Actually, I was about to say, Will, is this going to be posted with a permanent link sometime soon?
This will be posted here with a permanent link sometime soon, and I'm also getting Chrissy the file so that they can put it up on the
Dope.
IATSE Twitch page so that more people can see it.
Because we'll post somewhere once the permanent link goes up. But, you know, if your friend's interested, have them watch this, you know, watch it at 1.5 speed and just, you know,
Yeah.
the usual thing, or, you know, watch it in the background. Just educate yourself. You don't have to agree or disagree, but you should at least take the time to educate yourself on an issue.
And I think that is the biggest thing that I think our conversations, and particularly this conversation, reveal is that there's a lot that doesn't fit in the news cycle, right?
Oh, yeah.
We've got a 60-second short form content, 24-hour news cycle thing, and that's for
You'd
everything.
think there'd be time in 24 hours.
Right, and that's for everything, right? That's not like normally when we talk about that, we talk about it with politics, right? Because that's a place that is very prevalent and very pressing for a lot of us. But it's also true in the games industry, right? Like we are continually getting hit with new ads for new games and new this, that, the other, and it's very difficult to keep up with even just the good news. Even if you only try to keep up with the good news, you couldn't even just keep up with the good news. And there's an awful lot of good news, right? There are more games being released every year than any year before, right? The pace of the industry is growing. We talk about this all of the time, that there are more good niche indie games that are exactly what you want, right? One of my favorite games is XCOM meets Darkest Dungeon.
What's that one called?
That one's Last Spell. The Last Spell.
Wow.
It's a
Oh, okay. I did play that one.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Just,
you did-
I was
you did
like,
play
wait,
that one.
that sounds exactly like my game.
Yeah, it's a town defense zombie apocalypse tactics game with roguelike progression. Ready, go? And like and the industry's
Would recommend.
10 out of 10. And the industry's getting big enough to support that. So yeah.
Well, I think just to make note of that, Will, is what you're talking about is like the games industry is continuing to make games, continuing to expand. So even though there are mass layoffs right now, your labor will be needed. But we can be prepared if this happens again in the future. I think that the past 2 years have shown that the volatility in the industry is something that we need to prepare for. And in order to make sure that we have security in our jobs, we got to get it in writing. So, yeah.
Okay.
The only thing that I have to say around this is that follow us on social media, go to IATSE, ask questions. Like, we're always open. Like, even myself, that technically I'm just, you know, helping wherever I can as an activist. You know, our doors are always open. Because if you have questions, that's the best thing. Because right now, we need to do the effort, but we also need to have those conversations like we're having right now. And we need to be open to educating ourselves. And also hearing the other person next to us, because the other person next to us is also a fellow worker. And regarding with fans, what I would say, developers not stressed out or not burned out equals better games, always.
Yeah.
That's like non-debatable right there. So please.
And there is research behind that past a certain amount, you are not as productive and you introduce more errors in. And errors in mean times to find errors and fix.
Yes.
Like this is, you know, games are about cumulative development, not about, you know, just pure hours in. And cumulative development means moving forward, and things that have to be fixed and later redone is kind of the opposite of moving forward.
If you have 99 bugs and you fix one, you need to end up with 98, not 105.
Here's the thing, even if you want to be selfish as a gamer or a game fan, like, listen, at the end of the day, it's going to benefit you because you're going to get awesome games, more stable games, better service. You know, you're going to enjoy your hobby. That's the whole point of this. Again, nobody wants to make a bad game. I love that line. Oh, I power it all the time.
My big thing is I dream of a world where one day every game is given the release date of whenever it's ready. That's
We need to talk about that because that's still never going to happen.
100%.
Mythical. It's like a unicorn.
Hey, I said I dream.
Yeah,
I could
it's just
dream
like a dev saying, "I'm going to get everything I wanted into my game." Never happened. Never will happen in the history of the game industry.
I'm not already
sandbox.
cutting things that we had talked about putting in the mod pack that I was spent 3 hours designing this morning. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I understand that part. Friends, that is going to do it for our design club today. Thank you so much to Ben and to Chrissy and to Carlos for joining us today. Thank you as
Thank you for
always
having us.
to Geoff.
It's been awesome.
Yeah, it's been great.
So much fun.
Yeah, friends.
And thanks to chat.
Yeah. Chad, you did wonderful as always. I'm actually, it's weird. I'm gonna stay. Everyone else is gonna vanish, and you all can pop out of the call. And I'm gonna get Matt in, and we'll get set up, and we're gonna transition over to me and Matt hanging out and doing stuff. Thank you all so very much for coming and joining us today.
Solidarity forever, y'all.
Solidarity,
See you soon.
friendos. All right.
Bye, y'all.
Say bye, chat.
There you go.
All right. And that concludes our oh wait, hold on.
If you're still here, thank you very much. I don't.
Okay, great. I need to set up a new call. I need to set up a new call with Matt. Matt, are you here? Did you witness? Okay, cool, great. I'm sorry. We ran a little long. Matt and I are gonna do some Hearthstone. And where cat? I don't have a cat right now. So that's kind of the problem. I'm gonna send Matt this link. Chat, you all did so good. You all did so incredibly good. I just wanted to let all of you know that no, you're not gonna do somebody once told me. No, stop it. Don't do that. Whatever you do, definitely don't do that together for the rest of the time until Matt and I get set up. Thank you. Okay. All right. Great. Chad is now trying to smash mouth together. Fantastic.